My name is Amelie, and I am now 28. Behind me are years marked not only by calendar dates, but also by invisible scars, healed over with a thin, painful film. I had a brother, Jacob, who was a whole 5 years older than me, an eternity in the world of childhood. Our mother, gaunt with grief like a fragile autumn leaf, raised us alone after our father died tragically in a car accident. Before we continue, I'm very curious. What country are you from, dear listeners? Write in the comments where you're listening from. And now, let's continue. I was only 4 years old at the time, and Jacob was 9. I hardly remember our father, just vague, fragmented images, like an old, faded film. How he, strong and laughing, would toss me high, high into the air, and I would squeal with happy, carefree delight, confident that his reliable hands would always catch me. After his sudden and brutal death, the world turned upside down, painted in shades of grief. Mom took that loss hard, breaking inside. And now, from the vantage point of years lived, I understand that clearly. But what I couldn't understand then, at that tender age, was why Jacob suddenly became the center of our entire universe, its undisputed sun, around which all the planets revolved, while I turned into an invisible creature, a quiet shadow on the periphery of her maternal attention. He was 9, and was elevated to the rank of head of the family, the little man in a house devoid of masculinity. I was 4, and became the child whose existence Mom almost always forgot, absorbed in her grief and her newfound expectations for her son. It started small, with almost imperceptible cracks in our shared life. When I turned 7, I had my first dance recital, a long-awaited performance in a pink tutu, which fell on the same day as Jacob's important football match. Mom didn't hesitate to cancel my concert. To this day, as if through a fog, I see myself sitting backstage in a fluffy but meaningless purple tutu. I watched as other girls, radiant with happiness, hugged their parents, as the hall filled with other people's noisy families, and I waited with a naive, futile hope that the door would swing open and she would appear. But it never happened. Afterwards, my kind teacher, Miss Andrea, took pity and drove me home. This became the bitter norm, the habitual routine of life. Jacob's things, his needs, his successes were always the priority, pushing mine to the sidelines of family attention. I was 13 when I took first place at a prestigious regional science fair. I had painstakingly and with great enthusiasm created a robot capable of sorting recyclables from regular household trash with remarkable accuracy. This ambitious enterprise took 5 long months of dedicated work. I taught myself the basics of programming, piece by piece, studying worn-out library books and rewatching countless tutorial videos on YouTube. The respected judges specifically noted that my project was the most impressive they had seen from a middle school student in years. As a reward, I received not just the winner's blue ribbon, but also a ticket to the state competition, which opened up serious prospects. With this ribbon, a symbol of my triumph, I ran home, barely containing the trembling in my hands, caused by a mix of excitement and pride. Mom was sitting at the usual kitchen table with Jacob, completely absorbed in helping him fill out important documents for his college application. "Mom, look, I took first place. I'm going to the state competition," I blurted out, holding out the coveted ribbon. She looked up from the papers for a second, her gaze sliding indifferently over the blue silk. "That's great, Amelie," she said impassively, and immediately, as if nothing had happened, turned back to my brother. "Jacob, in this essay, you should emphasize the leadership qualities you demonstrated on the football team." I stood there for another minute, feeling a hot wave of shame and disappointment wash over me. Then, unable to bear this alienation, I silently trudged to my room and pinned the ribbon to an old cork bulletin board, where a whole collection of my awards, which she had never deigned to notice, was already gathering dust. The state science fair was indeed in April, and I performed respectably, placing 7th out of 200 of the most talented students from across the state. Mom didn't come this time either. She cited urgent work, but later, completely by chance, I learned the bitter truth. She had specifically taken a day off, not to support me, but to help Jacob move into a dorm for some summer program. The following year, when Jacob, quite expectedly, got into State University, you would have thought he had conquered Harvard or Oxford. The acceptance rate at State University is consistently 70%. Literally 70% of all applicants who apply get in. But Mom threw a real celebratory party for our entire extensive family. She posted 25 ecstatic posts on social media. 25. I couldn't help but count them. The feed was filled with his photos, lengthy texts about how incredibly proud she was of him, sentimental quotes about the unbreakable bond between mothers and sons. My cousin Madison wrote to me then, "Your mom is really going all out with the posts about Jacob, huh?" "Yes," I replied dryly. "She's thrilled." I didn't tell Madison how much those demonstrative raptures hurt me. I didn't say that I had been accepted into an elite school robotics club, that I had taught myself 3 complex programming languages without any help. Nor did I mention that my math teacher, a strict man sparing with praise, had once remarked that I was his best student in 15 years. None of this warranted a single mention on her Facebook page. Christmas came when I had just turned 16, and it was on that day that I realized with chilling clarity how irrevocably everything had changed in our house. For many months, I had diligently walked dogs all over our neighborhood, saving every penny I earned. With that hard-earned money, I bought Mom an elegant scarf she had sometimes mentioned dreamily, and for Jacob, a gift card to his favorite restaurant. I didn't forget my aunt, uncle, and cousin Madison, carefully selecting a gift for each. In total, I spent almost $200 of my own, hard-won money. On Christmas morning, Jacob, with an air of nonchalance, began opening gifts from Mom. First, a brand new laptop, worth $1,500, was produced. Then, a stack of new, fashionable clothes, likely costing no less than $400. The crowning glory was the coveted tickets to a concert of his adored band, for which another $150 had been paid. He didn't even say a simple thank you, just immediately delved into setting up the laptop. Then it was my turn. In the box, tied with a festive bow, was a $30 gift card to Target and a pack of plain socks. The socks, which was especially bitter, weren't even my size. 2 years later, when I applied to college, I timidly asked Mom if she could help me with the tuition. I had gotten into a prestigious technical university in another state, which offered me a scholarship covering 70% of the cost, but I needed money for the remaining 30%, plus room and board. "Amelie, I'm already helping Jacob," came the cold, cutting reply. "He got his degree and is renting an apartment, and I'm supporting him with the rent until he gets on his feet. There's no money left. You'll have to figure it out yourself." "Okay," I replied, clenching my fingers into fists. "I'll figure it out." And I did. I took out federal loans for the amount not covered by the scholarship and enrolled in the computer science department. I moved 800 miles away from home and didn't look back. College was hard, but not because of the lectures. I handled the academic load brilliantly. However, working 2 jobs with a full course load nearly killed me. On weekdays, right after classes, I rushed to my shift as a waitress at a cheap diner, and usually returned to my tiny room well past midnight. On weekends, I had the night shift at a 24-hour gym, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. on Saturdays and Sundays. I came home, slept for 4 hours like a log, and then forced myself to study. I ate mostly instant noodles, peanut butter sandwiches, and whatever I could take from work, food that was past its expiration date. My entire wardrobe consisted of 2 pairs of jeans and 5 identical plain t-shirts that I wore in rotation. While my classmates partied and went to football games, I was pouring coffee or wiping down sweaty elliptical machines. The summer after my sophomore year, Jacob finally graduated from university. Mom, sparing no expense, rented a whole banquet hall for his celebration. 75 people were invited, with a buffet and a professional DJ. She sent photos to our family group chat. I wasn't at that celebration of life. That summer, I was working 50 hours a week at 2 jobs, while also trying to complete 2 online courses. Madison, who was at the banquet, wrote to me, "This is ridiculous. I'm so sorry. Hang in there." "I'm used to it," I wrote back. But that was a brazen lie. I couldn't get used to it. I don't think it's even possible to get used to your own mother, seemingly erasing you from her memory. In my junior year, I worked myself to the bone and came down with a severe case of the flu. I was so sick I could barely stand, but I went to work anyway because I desperately needed the money. In the middle of my shift, taking an order from a customer, I just collapsed unconscious on the floor. My colleagues panicked and called an ambulance. I flatly refused to go to the hospital, knowing I couldn't pay the bill, but they made me sit in the back room for a whole hour, recovering. I missed 3 days of work, and my rent was due in a week. I was desperately short $300. I dialed my mom's number, an action I rarely resorted to, with a bitter awareness of my own humiliating request. "Mom, I'm so sorry to ask, but I'm short on rent this month." My voice betrayingly trembled. "I've been really sick and missed some shifts. Could you possibly lend me $300? I'll pay you back next month, I promise." A heavy pause followed, then cold, measured words. "Amelie, I just transferred Jacob money for his rent. I don't have anything extra right now. Maybe you could ask your roommates?" My roommates were other students, working for minimum wage, with no spare cash to their names. "Okay," I whispered, feeling a lump in my throat. "Thanks anyway." I hung up and, for the first time in years of desperate struggle, allowed myself to cry. Bitter, scalding tears of hurt and utter loneliness. Then I sharply wiped my face, clenched my fists, rummaged deep in the closet, and found a designer coat Madison's parents had given me the previous Christmas. I took it to a consignment store and sold it for $350. With that money, I paid the rent. I went back to work, and at that moment, I made a solemn vow to myself, never to ask my family for help again. I graduated from university in exactly 4 years, with a 3.8 GPA. I achieved it completely alone, without a single financial handout or even a simple word of support from my family. Graduation day arrived. I put on the rented gown and square academic cap, walked onto the stage, and received my hard-earned Bachelor of Science in Computer Science diploma. My gaze swept over the jubilant crowd of relatives who were shouting with delight and snapping photos. The section where my family could have been was empty. Mom didn't come. Jacob didn't come. No one came. Madison genuinely wanted to be there, but she had her own college finals that week. She sent me a gorgeous bouquet and a card that read, "I'm incredibly proud of you." It was the only acknowledgement I received from anyone connected to my family. To be precise, not quite the only one. A week after the ceremony, I received a card from Mom in the mail. Inside, in her sprawling handwriting, was written, "Congratulations on graduating. Sorry I couldn't make it. Jacob had a job interview that day. Love, Mom." Jacob, who by then hadn't been a student for 2 years, had a job interview. Of course, that event was incomparably more important than my graduation. I didn't call her. I didn't write her a single line. I simply threw that card in the trash and focused all my energy on what lay ahead. I spent months sending out resumes, submitting hundreds of applications. Most companies didn't even bother to respond. But one did. It was a tech startup, Cloud Sync Technologies, a young company dealing with cloud data storage, trying to find its niche in the struggle against industry giants. They offered me a junior developer position with a salary of $55,000 a year, plus stock options. I moved to the city where the company was located and rented an apartment with 3 roommates to minimize rent costs. My room barely fit 2 twin beds and a desk, but it was my fortress. I paid for it myself, with my own money, earned by my own labor, thanks to my degree, which I had earned entirely on my own. The work was intense. I was the youngest employee on the development team and felt the need to prove my professional worth daily. I arrived earlier than anyone, stayed late, volunteered for projects everyone else shied away from. I brought lunch from home, the same turkey sandwich and an apple, day in and day out for a whole year. While my colleagues went to bars, I went home and studied new programming languages and frameworks. Every extra dollar went towards paying down my student loan. My debt was about $45,000, and the interest was literally eating me alive. I didn't go out for entertainment. I didn't buy new clothes. I didn't even allow myself to think about a vacation. Every cent went either to those damned loans or into the savings account I was trying to build. After 2 years of superhuman effort, where every penny counted, I managed to pay off exactly half of my debt. My colleagues at the startup, observing my ascetic existence, openly considered me an oddball, not understanding how, with a decent salary for a graduate, one could live as if below the poverty line. They couldn't feel the oppressive weight that settles on your shoulders when you owe such a huge sum. They didn't see how the numbers on the bank statement swelled like a snowball every month with interest, a sight that caused me almost physical disgust. I desperately wanted that debt to disappear, to dissolve, to stop hanging over me like a sword of Damocles. Meanwhile, our company was growing rapidly. We started with a modest 10,000 users, and a couple of years later, our platform had 500,000 loyal customers. My contribution to this dizzying growth was hard to overstate. I completely overhauled a significant part of our infrastructure, making it not just faster but incredibly reliable. 18 months after I joined, to my own surprise, I was promoted to team lead. At 24, I was already managing a team of 5 talented developers. Another 6 months later, I headed the development department, with 12 people under me, and soon took the seat of director of engineering. In my 5th year of service to the company, at 26, the board of directors appointed me chief technology officer. I was now in charge of a department of 40 developers, and it was I who now made all the key technical decisions for our entire growing enterprise. It was in that landmark year that I made the final, victorious payment on my student loan. From then on, and for many years after graduating, I knew no debts, no loans, no credit card balances, absolutely nothing. Only solid savings and a package of company stock options that I had methodically accumulated. I still couldn't fully comprehend or accept this new financial reality. The company continued its victorious march. We passed the 1 million user mark, then 2 million. We successfully secured Series A funding, then Series B. Investors readily poured millions into us. Our CEO never tired of repeating at meetings that we were all part of something truly special. And last year, an offer came that turned everything upside down. An industry giant, Megatech Corporation, wanted to acquire CloudSync Technologies outright. And when the acquisition deal was finally closed, those very stock options I had been accumulating for all those 5 years magically transformed into real, live money. My account held $1.5 million. I was 27 years old, and my bank account held more money than my mother had earned in her entire life. I didn't tell anyone in my family. I didn't write a pompous post on Facebook, like Mom always did, reporting Jacob's every sneeze. I just quietly, without fanfare, transferred most of the amount into diversified investments and savings accounts, continued working, and for the first time thought about how I actually wanted my life to be. For the first time in my conscious life, I had a real, tangible choice. I no longer had to dread the upcoming rent payment, the grocery bill, or whether I could scrape together money for a new pair of shoes when the old ones fell apart. I could finally breathe deeply. 8 months ago, a colleague mentioned in passing that his neighbor was selling a house about 40 minutes from the city. I hadn't planned on buying property, but he showed me photos, and something about the place struck a hidden chord in my soul. I went to see it one Saturday. As soon as I drove up the driveway, I was seized by a strange but unmistakable feeling. This is mine. The house was 4,200 square feet, surrounded by 3 acres of wooded land, 5 bedrooms, even though I lived completely alone, a stone fireplace soaring up to the 2nd floor. The master bedroom had stunning carved wooden doors opening onto a spacious deck, and in the backyard, across the entire property, a lively, meandering stream gurgled cheerfully. I grew up in a cramped little room with second-hand furniture we got cheap, and now I was standing in a house that seemed to have jumped off the glossy page of an architectural magazine. The asking price was $875,000. A year ago, that astronomical sum would have only elicited a bitter, hysterical laugh from me. Now, I could afford it without a shadow of a doubt. I made an offer that same day. Full price, as per the contract, cash, no contingencies. The stunned sellers agreed almost instantly. 2 weeks later, after completing all the necessary paperwork, I became the full owner of that architectural marvel. I only told Madison about my purchase. She remained the only person in our entire large family who was genuinely interested in my fate, and therefore only she deserved to know about such an important event in my life. She selflessly helped me move, and we spent the whole weekend together, unpacking countless boxes and gradually settling into the new space. "Amelie, this place is amazing," she said, standing on the spacious deck and admiring the view. "You really did it, all on your own." "Yes," I quietly confirmed. "I suppose I did." Soon, my lonely life in this huge house was brightened by a large, good-natured mutt named Max, whom I adopted from a local shelter, where he had been languishing for 6 whole months. In the backyard, I lovingly planted a small vegetable garden. I joined a local hiking club, and to my own surprise, found real, loyal friends there who knew absolutely nothing about my painful past and family dramas. I finally had my own full-fledged life, which I had built from absolute zero, relying solely on my own strength. Now I visited my mother very rarely, at most 3 or 4 times a year, and only on major, non-negotiable holidays. Every such family gathering followed the same sad script. All the relatives invariably crowded around Jacob, showering him with congratulations on some achieved nom ordinary achievement of his, while I remained in the shadows, huddled in a corner, like the invisible creature they had always considered me. When some aunt or uncle, out of politeness, asked how I was, I would brush it off with a meaningless phrase that everything was as usual, and immediately steer the conversation to other, safer topics. Last spring, our family group chat literally exploded with news. Jacob had finally received preliminary mortgage approval and was going to buy his own house. Mom immediately, with her characteristic enthusiasm, began making plans for a grand holiday party. "We simply must celebrate this truly momentous event," she wrote, generously sprinkling her message with 12 enthusiastic exclamation points. When I arrived on the appointed day, the backyard of Mom's house was decorated with colorful balloons and a huge banner with the words, "Congratulations, Jacob," in giant scarlet letters. A cake specially baked for the occasion, shaped like a suburban house. About 20 relatives had gathered, and they all crowded around the guest of honor, as if he were a hero who had just made an incredible scientific breakthrough. 2,500 square feet, a full 4 bedrooms, and the neighborhood is just wonderful, Jacob explained proudly to our Uncle Dave. I managed to negotiate, got a really good deal. The assembled crowd nodded in agreement and showered him with new congratulations. I, trying to remain unnoticed, stood modestly by the refreshment table, poking a fork at a portion of potato salad. At some point, I went into the house to get a glass of water and inadvertently overheard a conversation between Jacob and Mom in the kitchen. "I'm still a little short on the down payment," he was saying, lowering his voice. "Could you lend me another 10,000? I know you already gave me 15, but I'm literally just a bit short." "Jacob, that's my retirement savings," Mom tried to object, but her voice already had that familiar weakness, foreshadowing imminent defeat. "I know, Mom, and I'll pay you back every penny. I promise. This house is a good investment. Its value will only go up." I hurried back outside, not waiting for her final agreement, though I knew perfectly well it would follow. She had already given him 15,000 from her retirement savings, and was now about to hand him another 10. And at that same moment, the memory of her flatly refusing to lend me $300 when I was sick and exhausted in college came back to me with painful clarity. That night was sleepless for me. I tossed and turned in bed, mentally returning to Jacob's house, his approved mortgage, and all the money Mom was so generously giving him. Things just didn't add up. And then I did what I had always been best at. I used my professional technical skills and started digging. It took me about 2 hours to gather all the necessary information. It turned out Jacob had 5 maxed-out credit cards with a total debt of $47,000. His credit score was a miserable 580, which was simply catastrophic. Furthermore, he had a delinquent car loan and 2 personal loans totaling over $20,000. He was drowning in debt, and Mom, unaware of the true state of affairs, continued with admirable persistence to throw her modest retirement savings into this financial abyss, which yielded no return. Soon, Thanksgiving arrived. Our family group chat was in a frenzy again. Jacob and his girlfriend Ashley had finally closed on the house and had officially moved in. They were now hosting a holiday housewarming dinner. I stared at my phone screen for a long time, watching the bubbling discussions, and then made a fateful decision. I was sick and tired of constantly hiding in the shadows, of being the convenient invisible woman for everyone, silently allowing them to treat me as if I didn't matter at all. I put on my most elegant suit, an expensive, perfectly fitting designer pantsuit bought with my own money, and a pair of exquisite leather shoes that cost more than my entire student wardrobe put together. I drove to Jacob's new house in my fully paid-off car. His neighborhood was a typical suburb, with rows of identical, cookie-cutter houses, neat little yards, and 2-car garages. His property was no different from the 5 others on either side. Inside, about 15 guests were milling about in the living room and kitchen. Jacob was proudly giving everyone a tour, showing off the standard budget-class cabinets and laminated countertops as if they were exclusive marble or precious wood. "And this is our master bedroom," he announced with pathos, "and it has a spacious walk-in closet." The assembled crowd burst into admiring exclamations and nodded approvingly. I remained silent. During the holiday dinner, Jacob stood up with a glass of wine and solemnly announced, "Ashley and I have some news. We're planning to try for a baby next year." Mom immediately burst into tears of happiness. "Oh, Jacob, I'm so proud of you," she exclaimed. "You're doing everything right. First a house, then a career, and now a family." Then she turned to me with a condescending, almost pitying smile. "Amelie, when are you finally going to settle down? I worry so much that you live alone in your little apartment, with no visible prospects." Jacob smirked sarcastically across the table. I slowly put down my fork and looked at her calmly, without a trace of agitation. "I settled down 8 months ago," my even, confident voice sounded. "I just didn't see the need to invite those who always doubted me to my housewarming." A tomb-like silence fell over the table. "What do you mean?" Mom asked, bewildered. "I bought a house. I moved. I built my life," I continued, enunciating every word clearly. "I adopted a dog from the shelter named Max. I planted a beautiful garden. I found real friends. So, technically, I settled down 8 months ago." Jacob snorted. "What, some studio apartment?" he sneered. "No," I retorted coldly. "A house. And to be honest, it's bigger than yours. 4,200 square feet on 3 acres of land. 5 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, a master bedroom with a deck. Paid in cash, no mortgage." The smirk slowly slid off Jacob's face. Mom opened her mouth but made no sound. My relatives looked at me as if a second head had suddenly grown on my shoulders. Aunt Linda looked genuinely impressed. Uncle Dave raised his eyebrows in surprise. "You're lying," Jacob shouted sharply. "You couldn't afford that." I smiled, a cold, joyless smile. "Want to talk finances, Jacob?" I asked softly. "Then let's discuss your 580 credit score, your 47,000 in credit card debt, the delinquent car loan, the 20,000 in personal loans. Let's talk about how you're drowning in debt and barely making ends meet, trying to pay your mortgage. But of course," I made a theatrical pause, "let's pretend that I'm the one with problems." Jacob's face turned crimson with rage and humiliation. Mom looked utterly shocked, as if she'd been electrocuted. "I worked tirelessly," I continued, and steel rang in my voice. "In 6 years, I got 5 promotions. At 26, I became the chief technology officer of my company. I managed a team of 40 developers. When Megatech Corporation acquired our company, the value of my stock options reached $1.5 million. My current salary is $185,000 a year, not including annual bonuses. So no, Jacob, I'm not lying. I just stopped playing a game whose rules were initially stacked against me." Jacob jumped up so fast that his chair clattered backward. "You think you're better than me?" he hissed, trembling with impotent rage. "No," I replied imperturbably, feeling an unprecedented calm. "I just stopped letting you pretend you're better than me." Mom also rose, her face contorted with anger. "Amelie, how dare you make such a scene at Jacob's party? Get out of here." I slowly stood up and met her gaze. "You would have seen all this yourself if you had ever looked at me properly, instead of being fixated on your golden boy." The drive home that evening seemed incredibly long, though it only took 40 minutes. My hands trembled slightly on the wheel, not from fear or regret, but from the adrenaline rush, from the liberating feeling that I had finally said everything that had been building up inside me for years. When I pulled up to the house, Max was already at the large living room window, watching for me. I opened the door, and he jumped around joyfully, wagging his tail furiously. I knelt down and let him lick my face, while I gently scratched behind his ears. Then I changed out of the expensive suit into comfortable sweatpants and an old, faded t-shirt. Brewing myself a cup of fragrant tea, I went out onto the deck and settled into a chair, looking at the darkening forest behind the house. The stream, swollen from recent rain, filled the surroundings with its powerful gurgle, audible even from here. It was quiet, peaceful, and everything around belonged to me completely. My phone vibrated. First Mom called, then Jacob, then Mom again, and then some aunts and uncles. I just watched the screen light up with incoming calls and didn't answer a single one. I owed these people nothing. No explanations, no apologies. I had told the truth, and if they couldn't handle it, That was exclusively their problem. That night, I slept more deeply and peacefully than I had in many previous months, or even years. The next 2 weeks passed in a soothing, familiar rhythm. I went to work, came home to faithful Max, puttered in the garden even though it was late November and nature was falling asleep, preparing for winter. I went on a hike with the local hiking club, had dinner with a friend I'd met at work. I lived my life, the one I had built myself, and hardly thought about my family. Then, 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, Mom called again. This time, I answered. I don't know why myself, perhaps curiosity drove me, or maybe a faint hope flickered in me that she was calling to apologize. "Amelie," she said, and her voice sounded unnaturally tense. "We need to talk about Jacob." Not a word of, "I'm sorry." Not a shadow of, "I should have treated you better." Of course, we need to talk about Jacob. He has serious financial problems, she continued, and panic crept into her voice. He's already behind on his mortgage payments. Missed 2 months. And the bank keeps calling me because it seems I'm a co-signer on his loan. Jacob made me sign some papers, and I didn't read them carefully. I didn't know I'd be responsible if he couldn't pay. I said nothing in response. I just waited silently, listening to her ragged breathing. "Amelie, I don't know what to do. He owes so much money, and now the bank says they might start foreclosure proceedings. My retirement savings are gone. I gave him $25,000 for the down payment, and now I could lose my own home if he defaults. Can you help? Could you lend him some money to cover the debts?" I slowly shifted my gaze to the large window, beyond which stretched my 3 acres of land, bought and belonging only to me, then looked down at Max, peacefully snoring on his soft bed in the corner of the spacious living room. "No," my voice sounded, cold and clear, leaving no room for doubt. "Amelie, please." Tears were audible in her voice, but they could no longer move me. "He's your brother. This is family." "Family," I repeated, and the word hung in the air, filled with bitter irony. Where was this family when I was killing myself working 2 jobs in college, and could only afford instant noodles for every meal? Where was the family when I, weak with the flu, fainted during my shift, and desperately needed $300 to avoid being homeless? Where was the family on my graduation day, when I walked alone onto the stage to get my diploma? Where were you all those years when I was pushing myself to achieve something, and needed just a drop of your recognition? "This isn't fair," Mom sighed, and her voice held the familiar weakness. "I did the best I could." "No," I objected, and every word was a honed blade. "You did the best you could for Jacob. You simply forgot you had 2 children. And now you want me to clean up the financial mess you've both happily landed in? No, I've had enough." "Amelie," she began, but I hung up. Then I blocked Mom's number. I blocked Jacob's number. One by one, I blocked the numbers of aunts and uncles who immediately started bombarding me with messages, urging me to help your brother, and false platitudes about family always having to bail out family. I turned off my phone and sat for several minutes in complete silence, barely breathing, feeling the trembling in my hands gradually replaced by an unfamiliar, all-encompassing calm. Max woke up, came over, and put his heavy head on my knees. I scratched behind his ear and looked into his loyal, intelligent eyes. "You know what, Max?" I said quietly. "We have Madison. She is our family. She's the only one who cared about me all these years. And that's enough. That's more than enough." I turned my phone back on and sent Madison a message. "Coming for the weekend? I'll cook dinner. We can chat." She replied almost instantly. "Of course. I've been so worried about you since that Thanksgiving. Your mom called me hysterical. I told her it was her own fault." I smiled, feeling truly warm inside for the first time in a long while. "You're the best." That Saturday, Madison came over. We cooked dinner together in my huge kitchen, drank wine on the deck despite the chill, and threw a ball for Max until he collapsed on the grass, tongue lolling out from happy exhaustion. We talked about her job, her new boyfriend, a planned trip to Japan. We didn't say a word about Mom or Jacob. "You look happy," Madison remarked at one point. "Truly, I don't recall ever seeing you so relaxed." "I am happy," I replied, and realized it was the pure truth. For the first time in my life, I don't have to prove anything to anyone. I'm not waiting for someone to notice me or be proud of me. I'm just living. "You deserve this," Madison said quietly. 3 months have passed since then. Mom's and Jacob's numbers remain blocked. From Madison, I learned that Jacob's house was indeed foreclosed on, and he had to move back in with Mom. I heard that Mom now has to work overtime to pay off the debts from his mortgage, for which she co-signed. I heard that Jacob is angry with me and blames me for his failures. But I don't care. It might sound cruel, but that's my truth. I spent 24 years caring, hoping, and trying to earn the love of people who never intended to give it to me. That's over. I work. I take care of Max. I see Madison regularly. I have my hiking group and friends from work. I've even started dating a guy I was set up with by mutual friends. Nothing serious yet, but it's nice. Sometimes I'm asked if I feel guilty about cutting off my family. My answer is no. You can't sever something that was never truly there. They disconnected me from their lives a long time ago. I've finally stopped pretending otherwise.